Hello and welcome to The Alignment. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can reduce user distrust for global products and overcoming the necessary issues and challenges that come with global products around the idea of trust. Just before we begin, we are Global App Testing. I've not got the slide there. We are Global App Testing. We offer a suite of tools to help localization managers, product managers, and engineers better understand their global experiences. We're lucky to work with some of the world's biggest technology companies and help them do that. If you are curious about how we can help you, don't hesitate to reach out. We also produce a great deal of content. So if you are not subscribed already, then I'm going to ask you now to subscribe to our podcast. It's called Building Globally. It's about all kinds of similar themes to this. My colleague is posting the link in the chat as we speak. Don't listen to it now, listen to it later. Tomorrow, we're actually releasing an episode. It is Shazad Sheikh. He is the head of product management, growth at Asana. I'm talking to him all about how we will grow products, different strategies for growth across different markets. So it's a really exciting episode, a great conversation, and we would love for you to subscribe. If you have not watched an alignment before, here's how it's going to work. We have 6 fantastic panelists here. They are all going to talk for 5 minutes on a subject that is related to the main topic du jour. And then after that, we're going to dive right into the questions. I've got a bunch of questions, but if you have one, you should use the Q&A function to ask it. That is the 2 chat bubbles that say Q&A down in the bottom bar. Please do dive in and we'll make sure we get to your question first. I know that we've got a number of questions that were asked in the pre-registration form. They're all going to get asked. So really excited to dive into those. So we've got 6 fantastic people here. Dimos is a senior product manager at ATG Entertainment. He's going to be identifying strategies to develop user trust. Following Dimos, we have Ryan Susairaj, who has held product director roles at multiple companies, including Indeed most recently. He's going to tell us about transforming your status with your clients from being a vendor to being a partner. Next, after Ryan, we're going to be hearing from Omar. Omar is going to be telling us a little bit about how he feels localization can help contribute to that all-important question of global user trust. Then we'll have Julia, who's going to be telling us or asking, is there even such a thing as a global product? The answer is no. Finally, we will have Olga. Olga is our head of UX research here at Global App Testing. She is going to be linking these challenges that we're going to be hearing all about, developing user trust, the global aspect to user trust, and testing and UX research, which is her bag. There's a lot to hear about there. Finally, I have some questions for Simon Hodgkins. Simon is the CMO of VistaTech. That is a leading language service provider. I have a couple of questions to Simon about how the bread and butter of localization, be that translation or other things, can contribute to user trust and where it is that clients go wrong. So a really packed schedule here today. First, though, because I've been talking for a long time, we're going to hear from Dimos. So I'm going to hand straight over to Dimos. Welcome to the floor. Dimos, tell us all about strategies for building local user trust.
Thank you, Adam. Hey, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are joining from. Yeah, so basically it's a very exciting time, I would say, right, when it comes to globalization, especially because, when it comes to companies who want to scale up, they want to actually expand into different regions, maybe different countries, or even, complete different continents. And yeah, I think it's very exciting because we have so many resources nowadays, which we didn't have, let's say, a few years ago at least. When it comes to strategies, Adam, you touched briefly upon it, right? It's not gonna sound as a surprise to many, and me myself, being, let's say, a product manager, it's really important to actually, experiment. I would say when it comes to globalization, in order to actually attach this to the whole topic, it's very important to remove assumptions as a first step. And when it comes to removing assumptions, create your hypothesis around how you would like to effectively expand your product or your business or your actual, let's say, product line, and then effectively, experiment and eventually localize. I think these steps are very important and they need to be followed as such. because there is always a lot of consultancies, a lot of insights globally that might create a lot of assumptions on what, let's say, a user in Brazil or a user in Greece or a user in Germany might look like, and a lot of archetypes or personas. However, it's very surprising sometimes when you run research, when you experiment on your product, how different this kind of let's say personas can look like, and how different the product can be shaped moving it forward from experimentation. Just to give you a couple of examples that ring to mind, and yeah, I prepared actually for today. So, ATG Entertainment is a live entertainment business. We have a couple of venues, we have productions, we have different venues around the world. And when we were looking into expanding our ticketing websites over to the US, right, although we are primarily a European business, we were actually considering a lot of different aspects. What do local players do in the US? How are they actually selling their tickets? What kind of experience are they offering? Something that struck us from the beginning of let's say, the entire user research perspective was the fact that most local providers or ticketing websites were actually offering single color seat maps. So then users could, choose their seats into a single color based seat map, and then they can go through the different checkout flows. That was very different to what we have over in Europe in many countries, right? Where we're offering different colors according to different signage or according to different price points. Yeah, whether a seat, let's say, features a benefit or a promo and so forth. So yeah, we had this assumption that maybe it's better to actually, offer as well, single color seat maps in the US while we're launching our ticketing websites, rather than going into colored seat maps the way we had them over in Europe. But for that, in order to actually, proceed with such a decision, you actually need proper experimentation, proper assumptions to be able to construct a whole, let's say, model out of it. To our surprise, upon experimenting further, we actually found out that indeed, a lot of customers seem to perform much better in the US when it came to colored, single color seat maps compared to multicolor seat maps, and vice versa. Over in the UK and Germany, it was actually the other way around. People were actually not performing as expected for our primary metrics. And yeah, it was something that we actually started hearing also from the contact center, that they were complaining about, moving into monochromes and not being able to find their favorite seats into their venues and so forth. So it was a very striking difference between how different users, different regions actually, perform into this simple item for many, just choosing your seat. But yeah, that was actually very striking, and how you can localize further. I'm not sure if we run out of time. I have one more example. Can I share it quickly, or?
Yeah, you could share an example.
Okay, perfect. Another one which comes to mind, right? And that was from a recent experience before ADG, actually. So I was a PM in PepsiCo. We were building global products. We were rolling out market upon market for business intelligence solutions within the business. For those who know or are familiar with PepsiCo, right? We're talking 50,000 plus employees. So it was a solid user base as well. But different markets have very different ways at looking their data, looking at their reports, structuring the whole, let's say, business line as well based on those numbers. When we were rolling out into different markets, we started actually with the UK, then we followed up with Spain, with France, and so forth, or Turkey and Russia. These were the biggest markets in Europe. We were noticing, although some markets were actually utilizing all the reports and they were very active, they were sharing feedback, we were seeing great numbers. Other markets were dead silent. Nobody was using them. Nobody seemed engaged. Yeah, it was very interesting as well, because we actually, communicated with all of them in advance. We made a lot of demos, a lot of walkthroughs, newsletters and so forth. So the community was there. It's just something was lacking and they were not using the product. So post organizing specific moderate sessions, right, in order to understand, what is the core hypothesis we had, why aren't you using our product and so forth, we found out very quickly and strikingly into 3 of the markets that the users were pretty vocal, saying that, hey, this is not how my data looks like. This is not how it works like. This is not how I view my product line or how I analyze for my quarterly business review meetings. So we disengage users by actually assuming that they would be the same just because they belong, in the same company, they've been working there for years, and they would actually, just have the same sensitivities or weaknesses and strengths and so forth. So it was very interesting. The moment actually we started changing all the reporting lines, just creating specific widgets, specific views for those markets, we noticed that actually after 6 months, a 60% uptick in terms of product adoption, active usage base, and actually 10% even when it came to daily usage within the different markets. So it was great success in order to, localize your product, keep in mind their sensitivities, keep in mind their concerns, and involve them in the product process, basically.
Amazing. And a testament to the power of experimentation in acquiring users. I'm going to pass over to Ryan now about how we can transform your client's perspective of you from a vendor to a partner. Over to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Adam, and great, Dimos. For the folks listening, just a quick logistical thing. The slides aren't moving. They're not supposed to move. I have no slides. So it's not because your screen's frozen, there's nothing. It's a great topic, and I think when we think about moving from, I think the real outcome of a good trusting relationship is when you can start to see behaviors from our users and customers where they no longer treat the merchant or the vendor as a vendor, but more as a partner. And if you think about that, that largely comes down to a good relationship, and good relationships, they are largely underpinned by two pillars, in my opinion: good trust, high communication, and of course, on a foundation of high work ethic and a lot of empathy. So the things that come out of good trust and good communication is that relationship, and really wonderful things start to happen in your relationship with the customer and the user, where they start to do things and partner with you on the development of the product, on the feedback, but also in a proper, amazing scenario, they become advocates for you. They talk about you to other folks as well. So kind of, I think that is it's a nirvana stage to be at. I've been in organizations where we've done that reasonably well, and others where we've gone diabolically wrong. And usually when it's gone completely wrong, it's because it is so commonsensical, the things I'm about to say, that I think in the places where it's gone wrong, it's been ignored because they assume it's already there, or it's really hard to put into a product, into a software form factor. So the kind of 3 or 4 steps or 3 or 4 pillars that I'd like to touch on very quickly. The first one is really take the time to understand what your users care about. I'm not talking about customers here, not the person writing the check, the person using the kit you're trying to get across. Take the time to understand it. And practically the best way to do this is in this data obsessed world that we're currently in, because it's so easy to get data all the time. A lot of the time there's an absence of insight. So use the charts, use your various tools that show user behavior in a certain way to inform what you speak to your users about. And when I say speak, I don't mean behind a user form. I mean speak to them. Whether you call it discovery, user research, whatever it is, you can't do that a lot. You probably can do that to 10, 15, 20 people, maybe 100 if you're a large organization. But use the data to understand what you speak about. And when you speak about those things, then use data through a survey and other things to validate at scale. Now send it to 1 million people or 1,000 people to see if that's right. And once you understand what their world is like, so that is how they may use your application, if they're already an existing user, or something else that they're using, then you've got to tell them, well, thanks for your time, and you're helping me understand this. What on earth are you going to do with it? Explain to them your intentions. This is not the solution or how the might look like, but sort of try and express to them your desire to solve these problems or not solve these problems, because that's not your wheelhouse. Because then it's again building trust, because you're communicating to them that I spent time with you. These are the things I'm going to try and help with. These are the things I'm not going to try and help with. Again, it's building trust and transparency. And the things that you do say you want to tackle and solve, you may not be able to actually do them. Things change all the time. Roadmaps change all the time. Funding changes all the time. But that's okay. That's where communication comes in. Be transparent. Of course, you can't, perhaps in some cases, you can't breach confidentiality and say why you can't do certain things. But if you've given the sign to a user or a customer that you are about to try and solve a particular problem they've expressed to you, and you no longer can do that, you need to take the time to tell them that. They may not be happy with you, but I guarantee they'll be a lot happier if you told them ahead of time rather than on release day when they were expecting it and did not get it. The third thing is, when communicating, speak human. As in really speak. I've got a test which I call sell it to my sister. My sister's brilliant. She's great. So I just use it as I use it as a analogy of someone who doesn't know my world. And how would I explain it to her? Use the simplest language possible to explain everything you are doing, how you want to engage with them, what the release is. Don't go down to, and that may mean if you're speaking to a technologist, a CTO, someone who's very technically proficient, then you do speak in technical terms, and you do speak about TPS and lag times and all those things. But that also means if you're speaking to someone who's not proficient in that way, you don't speak in that way. So be very, very clear. The reason I'm saying this is one, it's always easy to trust simple words because you don't feel the person's hiding behind any language. The words can only mean one thing. Second, it's very easy to have a conversation, and it shows proper cognitive empathy. So you are genuinely trying to share something with your customer and user and want them to return the favor and speak to you about what this means to them. I think finally, before I just kind of summarize these few minutes, is it's not a four-step journey, full stop. It's a circle. Keep doing this with them over and over and over again. And the best sort of parallel I can try and help everyone with is as the best relationship you have with anyone. Now, that may be a partner, a child, a dog, a pet. It doesn't matter. There is one good relationship, at least, that I hope most of us have. How are you keeping that going? What's happening? What's happening? What are you doing? It's a work. It's a daily, effort to do this, but you're practicing something every day. Finally, when you see all this come together, you'll realize that what you're actually practicing is your duty of care. You are providing software that someone may or may not be paying for. They're certainly paying with their time to do something. You have a duty of care to what you're delivering to them. And if you do that well, the result you get is trust. Just 30 seconds before I wrap on this, Adam. When you do this well, you will mostly see, for the purpose of local trust, I've seen sort of these 4 examples of things happening when you're doing them well. So if you want to measure whether you're doing them well or not, your service or your product needs to be in a local language where you want to target. Now, by that, it may mean it's on a scale of the UI and the UX being in local, but also it should go down to the documentation, the guides, the emails, the marketing materials. Truly want to gain the trust of a particular demographic that speaks a particular language or local culture, it has to be end to end. Second is adapt the user experience to show that you care about the region they're in or the culture they're in, or explain to them why you're not doing that or not doing that yet. Very classic, obvious example, you might be in the Middle East, things go from right to left. Very difficult to do in the product for a variety of reasons, but if you can't do it or you're not doing it yet, explain to them why you're not, because that also shows that you care. It doesn't show that you're being ignorant and ignoring them. Lastly, of course, is around being compliant with regulations. So local sort of just way things get done, even if they're not regulations in this part of the world, things are done in this particular way. They expect customer support over email and not over a video call. Explain why you're doing that or why you're not doing that. I'll pause there. It's a very deep topic, but ultimately find ways to build a trusting relationship built on duty of care and communication. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I love the idea that it is a two-way relationship. I think we can think of users as something we do things to and talk at a little bit too much often. I'm going to hand over to Omar now. Omar is going to be talking about how localization can drive user trust. Over to you, Omar.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And basically building on everything that Dinos and Ryan said, it's a continuation to that. So just one thing that I really need to call out, I think it should be an obvious thing, but I've seen so many companies and organizations with many sizes that don't really realize that localization is something that is way broader than just having languages and translations. It's like really in the heart and core of the full user experience and the customer experience design of whatever kind of product, whether it's a digital product, an offline product, whatever. So it goes much way further and deeper than just having some translations to be available for a specific market. And like Ryan said, for example, I'm actually from the Middle East. I come from Egypt, and while it's technically not very easy to adopt right to left languages like Arabic or Hebrew or Farsi, but it's really important to show that the full experience, like, is localized in a way to be able to speak your language, and it makes the platform or whatever product you have more closer to the customer. But also the context of the content that is being created using that language. It's not just straightforward translations that you have to do. So for example, the Middle East, the Arab world, it's like 26 countries. Yes, all of them, they speak Arabic, but in 26 different dialects. And, there are different terminologies and different words that you could use here and not use there, and they mean different things and all of that. And like, I remember even in my early days when I was working with my friends in college, and sometimes we just, went through the Windows operating system and turned it into Arabic just to have some fun and some laughs about the translations and how everything is translated. Like, it was hilarious. So like, realizing that localizing is more than just a translation. It's the heart of the context and of how you create content. Translation and languages are just tools to actually create content, to promote whatever you are doing on that platform, and to make the user experience more engaging and more easy, and hence gaining the trust of that specific demographic that you're trying to localize to. But also it goes further than that into understanding really the culture that you're addressing and creating content for. Also, like, it goes into the small details, like, adapting specific date and time formats, for example, or supporting different currencies, local and regional payment methods, for example, are things that are way beyond languages and translations, but they actually enable and they build trust with the whole user experience and customer experience on your platform. And of course, talking about the UI design itself, having it customizable, having it adaptable, again, relevant to the culture that you're trying to address. And of course, making sure that you are adhering to some content sensitivity between different cultures, again, that you are trying to address, just to make sure that you're not offending anyone, that you're not actually shooting yourself in the foot by trying to promote something in a specific way that might not be very convenient or very accepted in some areas of the world, or not understood in the same way that you mean. In order to be able to do this, you need to be always like very close to different markets that you are trying to assess, and have ruthless prioritization of what markets are really important for you to target them with that kind and that level of localization. Because, let's admit it, like, you cannot really serve and fully localize your whole platform, your whole experience for every single market that you're serving and operating in. So there has to be like one global version of whatever you're doing, and then you start picking markets depending on some criteria that you decide across the business, and the criteria that is decided by leadership, by how they're strategizing about growing the business. And then you start having this laser focus on how to really and fully localize the experience, and collaborating with different teams across the organization to deliver that localized experience, because it's either that you nail it, you get it like real good, or it's gonna be a wasted investment at best, or it really hurts your credibility, hurts your trust, and so on. I could mention an example of, like, it's going to be a vague example because I cannot really share a lot of details, and I cannot name the platform, but one platform was wanted to launch, just for marketing and promotional reasons, wanted to launch Hindi language, because India is a massive market, massive population. We want to be localized. Let's launch the language. Invested a lot in people and doing and shifting everything and doing all of that, a lot of tech, and realizing after 1.5 years of this launch, then there was no impact whatsoever. There was no conversion because number one, India was not a priority market. Number two, they were not a leading player in that market. There are like 5 or 6 other competitors that are having more market share. So like the market adoption is already low. And like during the 1.5 years, like 1,000 people used the Hindi language. They always prefer to use English just, for using that platform. So like that was a totally wrong decision based on the wrong criteria and like no really solid or like good market insight. And also, how do you perceive your brand and how are you building your whole localization strategy? One other very simple example that I could mention that shows the evolution of how you could start building a localization strategy. It could start by like, yes, supporting languages and translations. And then you go into supporting more details into the whole experience, then going into customization, and then going into personalization is when you go into Google Maps, and then you start, you're used on using some metrics like kilometers or miles based on where you're from and where you're living, right? So it starts by supporting that, having that in the system, and then giving you the ability, which is customization, to pick for yourself, what do I want to see? Do I want to see kilometers or miles? And then going into a higher customization, which is, okay, now you're living in a kilometer country, and then you travel to a miles country. So it automatically shifts. But then it gives you personalization when you could say, okay, for me, my preferences is to use this metric, whatever I would go. Or it would give you the choice of, okay, now you're in a country that does this or that. What do you want to do? And then it goes into more and more personalization. Now, also one good thing here is that this Gen AI boom that we're living in is allowing us right now to discover into the topic of hyper-personalization, like how really to personalize for you as a person, Omar or Adam or Ryan or Dimas, that what are the things that you really like? How do you want to do things? How and shifting the whole experience into experience that is not just designed for English people or Arab people or people like, from Latin America, but like just for you personally. And I think that's going to be something really interesting that we would see in the next coming years.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Omar. I love the way of thinking about localization as an investment. I think it's such an important aspect of it that gets neglected so often. Julia, we're going to hear now about why there's no such thing as a global product. Over to you, Julia.
Thanks, and thanks for having me. I don't believe there is a global product. I actually get really suspicious when people talk about globalization. As a company, you may have global ambitions, and that's super fair. But a product in itself is born locally, right? Like it's the child of the environment in which it's born. If you think about one of the most important aspects of product management and inception is personas. When you think about personas, these personas need to be highly precise, right? You cannot have a persona thinking that it's a globetrotter. Like, even if it is, like, that's for a very niche product, but a person is not global, is very local and attached to the environment in which they live. And the same is for the team creating the product, the global version of the product, right? There's only an initial version of the product that is a byproduct of the environment in which it's created, of the personas for which it is created initially, and of the circumstances that have surrounded its arrival. So, localization is almost the opposite of globalization. I don't know why they use the synonyms. You know, sometimes you may see a job ad that talks about, you know, globalization ownership as opposed to localization. So there's no advantage to making a product feel global. You know, Coca-Cola is a global brand. You know, I love Diet Coke, and I've got nothing against it, but like, then what they've found a way to do is creating marketing campaigns that feel tremendously local and have that local appeal. So it's by doing the local appeal and getting that game right that you become a global company. It's not the other way around. You can't say, I've got global ambitions, therefore I'm a global brand, I'm going to globalize my product. I think that's different. You know, it's at the source. It's the very reason why a lot of localization programs fail. Globalization programs, whatever you want to call it. It's this superficial, the idea of the fact that you can superficially adapt something just by swapping some text on its controls, and it's going to get you to win in the market. And so a lot of money gets thrown into this globalization programs that in fact are just you know, just a project management artifice, right? A global product is an artifice. It doesn't exist as a concept. So what's your level of commitment as a company that, I don't know, for example, is born out of the UK? Let's say you want to go France, right? Like, what's your level of commitment? Whenever I'm requested to localize a product into whatever language, I take a step back and say, right, let's take a look at what, you know, whether we're ready. Is there product market fit? And it's not a really easy question to answer. And that's your first, because whenever the answer is no, but, right, then that but needs to be scoped in its entirety. Like, what does it take for us to have product market fit? And until we have it, we're not going to have this conversation any further, right? So I want to see your roadmap for product market fit, ETAs, and then we can work backwards from there, that arrival, and build the localization of the wording and the language experience alongside it, so that you're ready to launch when you are already ready. Until you've got product market fit, you're not ready. But then also, because there's a lot of money that is necessary to localize a product effectively, my next question is, how much impact can you drive in the next 6 months and 24 months respectively? Because it's, you know, a market can be very easy to scale, but not going to give you a lot of money in the long run. Or it's going to be harder to get into and grow, but it's going to give you a lot of impact further down the line. So let's have a look at the GP impact and new users impact at 6 months and 24 months projections. Have you got that? Have you got product market fit? Does that make sense compared to cost of actually localizing? And then let's go. To me, it's the only real conversation that can happen before we decide if we're ready to roll on the localization front.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Julia. And then our final speech, before I dive into questions for Simon, Olga, tell us what local users really want and how can we test for it? Over to you, Olga.
Sure. Thanks, Adam. Okay, I'm Olga. I lead the UX research team here at GAT. Now, everybody has said great stuff about what leads to user trust in general and what can lead to localized user trust. And I wanted to add some thoughts about UX and about how local research can help gain that trust. And now, when entering a new market, you obviously want to have to invest in a lot in the operational side, but I also wanted to highlight the importance of localized design. So first thing you can do is localizing the user experience, which makes a promise to users that your product was built with them in mind. And it's a huge shame if that is not the case. and when the teams respond to in-market pull factors, but then there's something which doesn't work. So for example, payment methods haven't been set up according to local preference. And I know that this is something that Omar has already mentioned, but I'm not even talking about such things like, I don't know, there's a specific method in a certain country that is only used by that country. But even if we have the same payment methods across countries, there might be different reception of those methods. So for example, in my country, for a long while, there was a case of credit cards and like distrust of people to provide their credit card details online, or some people even struggled linguistically because they said, oh, I have a debit card, so I can't use this because it says credit card. So it was a bit challenging to people. So again, even if it's not something like, oh, this I don't know, China has some specific payment methods only used in China. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about approach to the same things in different markets. All right, and the second important thing is to map out your trust codes. And by trust codes, I mean things that are all around us. So for example, there can be this little log icon that symbolizes encryption. There can be different ways that different countries do social proof, and there can be animations that visualize the progress with your food delivery. Right, and I think this is quite an important element of localization, and it's good to have them. It's a good start to have them scoped out. And ideally, you would like to engage your local teams in this exercise, as codes. The thing with codes is that they are not the same in all of the countries. So something that works, for example, in Poland might not work in another country. And now, another thing that I wanted to highlight when it comes to user experience is the importance of that very, very first step, which is identifying what's crucial to users in the given market. And a lot of time when people talk about localization, this was something already mentioned. They mostly talk about translation, and you can't really reduce localization to just translating text from one language to the other. And it can be super easy, right, to get into this workflow. Okay, I will get the translation done, and then like, my job is done. No, you need to dive deeper and better understand your audience. And by the way, speaking of translation, it sometimes happens that businesses do over-translate. And here we had, as you can see on the slide, we had Reiko from Slack talk about how after doing local research in Japan, they actually discovered that it's better to leave some words in English rather than Japanese, because they were already used in Japan in their original English form. And it seemed a bit strange to Japanese users to suddenly have them translated. So they decided to leave them alone. In general, I believe it's crucial to focus on core product changes, which make the product work in general in the first place, rather than do the localization work, specifically translation work on top of something that is already finished. For example, one client that we have that I focused on in my research work needed to adjust their privacy settings. Why? Because after running research in some local markets, they realized that female users in that market were unwilling to share their phone numbers outside of their close circles, even with restaurants, because as it turns out, they experienced harassment from delivery drivers. So this was why there was preference for stronger privacy settings. And another, again, I'm referring to the slide. Here I am talking about the BBC. They found out that Nigerian users were using data restricting tools on their phones because the data costs in Nigeria are very high. And the company needed to figure out how to keep a high quality of the user experience and at the same time accommodate this need from the users to save data and therefore save money. And I wanted to say that it's easy for me to talk, but in general, it's not easy. And gaining local users' trust is a game that even big players do lose. And a good example is eBay. They had to actually close their branch in China because they had a very hard time competing with local companies. The local companies better knew the local context, and here's where eBay failed, and they didn't adjust well enough to Chinese consumers. And if you want to avoid eBay's fate, it is a good idea to first run some exploratory studies and some tests on the ground before the launch, rather than to quickly try to fix things as they come. And here at Global Lab Testing, we help companies reach those audiences that they normally don't have access to in countries all across the globe. And we can gather this knowledge quickly in multiple markets at once. And I have to tell you from my personal perspective that being here at GAT for quite a while now, I feel like I still barely scratched the surface when it comes to knowledge about local markets. And I have to say that I learn something new every single day about those local markets. And I really encourage you, everybody who's listening, to try as well and see how much you have to discover. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Olga. So I'm going to introduce Simon, who is the CMO of VistaTech now. I have a couple of questions for Simon. First, Simon, we've heard a few different perspectives on different localization activities, the results of those activities. Obviously, the subject of this webinar is trust. I wonder if you could spell out for us, in your view, which localization activities could a product manager or localization manager undertake that would have the greatest return, the fastest, in terms of actually driving up user trust?
Well, I think just building on what Julia was saying about there are no global products, there's no global content. So from a localization perspective, I was, reading recently that in New York alone, for example, there are 200 languages. 25% of people living there don't speak English at home. So when it comes to your question about what activities can you do, it's about focusing on the right content. It's about figuring out what you need to resonate, engage, and connect with your customers. And you need to invest in that. I was also talking to a gentleman called Kevin O'Donnell recently from Global 10X, and we were discussing how a very large company, I won't share the name of the company, but they invested heavily with multilingual speakers, with people that, were natural experts in a particular area. But at the front end, they had an AI chatbot. And the problem was that they didn't put in place the right languages for their target audience. So although they'd invested heavily in actual real people behind the chatbot for when the chatbot ran into problems, so we had AI at the front, the humans weren't engaging, and therefore there was a huge breakdown in that process. So that sort of takes it further from the process of localizing content or translating content into workflow processes, and making sure again that you're focusing on the areas where you need that return, and thinking about it from a UX perspective. How are the users supposed to work through that content journey with you? And I think ultimately, if you are missing, simple areas that are making that journey, that user journey, difficult or uneasy or unpleasant, that's where you're not going to win. So rather than get into the ins and outs of translation and localization, because we could wax lyrical on that all day, I think it's about focusing on the content that you need and the customers that you're trying to communicate to. And you can't just do that at a country level. If you take China, for example, each city has very different cultures, very different approaches, very different dialects. It's not the same. France, Spain, Germany, multiple hot pot of languages and people.
Fantastic. And I just want to ask the flip side of that as well, actually, which is about whether there are actual localization activities that are counterproductive, or where you actually either create risk for yourself or actually do damage to local user trust with a localization activity gone wrong? Are there any examples you've seen of that?
Yeah, it does happen, and that's typically where people are trying to use, let's take video content, you're trying to do long form, short form content, or whatever platform you're working on. But again, if people don't have the trust in that content because it doesn't have the right language, it doesn't have the right dialect, it's not hitting the right cultural resonance, the image is wrong, the colors are wrong, all those things are important. But in terms of eroding trust, it's the limitations of some of the technologies today. I'd say one of the key risks, just to single on that, is that the technology is really good. AI is really good at helping, but there's, that phrase of having a human in the loop or having an expert in the loop, which I know is overly used, is really, really important. And when you think about things like content from regulated industries, whether it's life sciences or financial or whatever, but just content in general, if you're trying to get your content to speak to people, to resonate with people, to help them make a decision, to influence the way that they feel, technology is good, but it's not perfect. So focus on the users, focus on the quality. Don't forget that the technology is there to help humanity, not the other way around.
Fantastic. Now, I do have one more question for Simon about AI, but I want to ask the whole panel because I think that it is not really possible in 2024 to talk about localization and trust without at least having a moment where we all talk about the AI question. Before I do that, if you are enjoying this webinar and you would like to come to the next one, my colleague will be posting the link in the chat. The episode that comes next will be how can I scale my customer feedback loops as I grow internationally? If that is a question of interest to you, please do join us for the webinar. It will be a month from now, I think, so sometime in mid-July at this time of day. Fantastic. I'm going to get this off the screen. Sorry, I pressed exit rather than stop share there. Well, there we go. Cool. So I want to basically invite everybody on the panel, if they would like to come in with their take on the way that they think AI used in a localization context is going to impact user trust. I know that Simon had some thoughts about the use of AI in video, which I think is an underexplored aspect because we often talk about AI being used in translation and a kind of large scale thing, but I don't hear it talked about so much in video with regards to localization. So do you want to come in first, Simon, and then we can hear from the rest of the panel on AI?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, in particular about video, it's a great medium for building trust, right? And we're all consuming video. We're all sitting on public transport. We're in airport terminals. We're just picking up our devices all the time. We're addicted to them. We're all looking for dopamine hits. But more and more people use it to understand, learn, etc. But when it comes to AI, things like high-end dubbing, subtitling, lip syncing, and making sure that the language changes when the user clicks on the video, making sure that it's not just a bad attempt like an old movie where the dubbing is so bad it's unwatchable or unbearable. We've all seen those examples. And brands, and particularly companies that are trying to grow their customer base, you need to pay attention to this stuff. And video is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, we'll all put up with the family video that's grainy, that's filmed badly, that's shaky, etc. But ultimately, when it comes to content that resonates, it's not really those things that matter. It's is it being understood? Is it actually somebody speaking that native language? Is it somebody that understands the culture? And that can be very, very different. You can't just put a video out there, going back to what Julia was saying, you can't just assume that that video product is going to connect with everybody in a particular region. It just doesn't work that way. This isn't an advert, but we invested heavily in our own sort of AI dubbing product, Vistatex Speech, for that very reason, because the fast volume that people want to turn around content, it's very hard for humans to do it all. So having that AI that can come in and help you do that quickly, and then maybe having the human quality check that goes through it, particularly where brands are involved, is really, really important. But look, I'll open it up to the panel because I know we're up against it here.
Yes, Ryan, do you have a take for us on the impact of AI for user trust in localization?
I'll be quick. My kind of view of it is, I think, especially when we look at, when you say AI, this great big word, but I think in terms of what most folks think is the instantiation of AI through things like a chatbot or ChatGPT. So within that context, I think the risks to trust are, because of the way these LLMs are built and the way it converses with you, it comes across quite self-righteous. The response always seems very correct, very well thought out, very well reasoned. And to folks who are not too familiar or who are not paranoid as I am, they may go, well, that must be right. Now, this thing seems really reasonable. It's not only telling me the answer, the way it's telling me, especially if it's not my native language, goes, this thing is probably right, right? So I think it is going to probably, there is some element here of, therefore, we need, the folks who are building these systems need to make sure, I think, two things, that the information is either mostly correct, or where it isn't, there's some acknowledgement that this is what we think it is. Second, full transparency. So show them our work. So if this plus this is 5, I'm going to show you how I've come up with that, so you can inspect and correct me if I'm wrong. And the last thing I think is this whole bunch of stuff, because a lot of this data and these models are trained on huge amounts of public information for the last couple of decades, which arguably could be very, very biased, whether that's gender bias, demographic bias, whatever that bias is. And as a result, there's a lot of reasons, I think, reasonably, that people should trust these things less. But I think the way we counter that is by providing the transparency and improving these systems. So they're seen more as guidance versus absolute finite, this is your answer. I'll pause there.
I think, and I just want to relate this as well. So one of the, I want to make sure, because we've got 8 minutes and we've got four questions have been asked on the entry form. So it'd be great to get through all of them. One person has asked whether trust will be the new experience in the AI era. I know that Julia had an answer for that one.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the pick and roll, but it's basically about how our brain records experiences. And I think it can teach us a lot in relation to trust, but also in relation to, how do we scale AI and where. So, when we go through an experience, our brain records it not as a video of the full thing, but as instant pictures. It takes pictures, and it takes the most memorable pictures in 2 moments, at the end and in moments of peak emotions. So when you're particularly stressed or particularly hopeful or particularly happy, that's when the first picture gets taken, and then it gets taken at the end. And if you have a few moments of really intense emotions, it could be fear, imagine you're trying to create an account on a new product and it has to do with your money, if you want to relate it to the Revolut journey. There's a couple of steps in that onboarding journey where you're going to be particularly stressed, and your brain is going to take an instant picture at that moment in time, and it will also take it at the end. So you will basically pay a lot of attention to how the story ends, and then you're going to take a lot of attention to this couple of moments. And there's a lot of insight in, for the brands that are trying to build these journeys and the UX of it. So how much do I invest in the usability and the UX of this product should be distributed according to the ways people go through experiences and the way people use products according to these principles. And then just on how language relates to trust, because the language, is a question I get a lot. Again, like I'm one for not localizing superficially, but also I'm also in favor of using people's local language wherever possible. Whether that's AI powered or not can be decided depending on the criticality of content or whatever your data is telling you, or the pick and roll. But in the end, language is one of our greatest abilities as humans. And it affects our thinking in more ways than we realize. It changes our perception of the world and the perspective of the experiences that we're living. So it's not just a communication tool. It's not just how you make sense of what's on a screen or the product journey that you're undertaking. It's a component of culture. And so because the language we speak reflects our values and beliefs, right? There's a famous linguist, Daniel Everett, that said language can be considered a cultural tool, right? It's molded by the people who speak it over time. So if you think about the Chinese language, they have so many idioms for family. So you can definitely see how much importance they give to family. And those are things that we need to take into account. You, as a product, you're not going to send your content to AI when it talks to family and serve it unchecked to a Chinese audience. Because if you mess that, you're touching some, nerves that it's very hard to come back from it from a trust perspective. So the bottom line is language, in affecting our view of the world, languages focus our attention, they focus our thoughts on specific aspects of the world. And this is very important for when we use our products, right? We need to know loads about the culture of the market that we're trying to break into. And being able to link these patterns of usage to the product and give more, budget, more tender loving care to these moments in the journey. They can make it or break it, and these moments will vary depending on culture and on language, right? So if we think about what is trust in UX design, it refers to a user's confidence in the product, right, in the service or in the brand. So yeah, of course, they include clear and consistent communication. But it's about creating that sense of security for the user, right? Making them feel comfortable using the product. And the best way to build that sense of security is your mother tongue. Like, just think about the term mother tongue, right? What's more reassuring and feels more safe than a mother's hug? And it's not just about using the right language, the user's language, but it's about using the user's own reference points, the cultural points, like what Olga was saying about the icons. It's way bigger than just translations. And it does, again, it goes back to what we were saying before. Are you committed to doing that? No one is forcing you to localize. And it should only be kept for those go-to-market moves that you've done so much due diligence on, that are a genuinely massive opportunity. And then, you're going to go deep. It's depth over breadth, if that makes sense.
I've got a final question, or maybe two questions that we'll squeeze in. So these are both from an e-commerce retailer. And actually, I think it'd be probably most relevant for Omar and or Demos to answer, because it's about booking and buying. But this person has asked, do you find that customers are more inclined to purchase from a website that uses their own country domain, e.g. .co.uk or .fr, than from a .com website? Does that choice of domain affect trust? So there's a narrow question, and then a slightly broader question. Would you say that having a product or service content localized into every language, regardless of the size of the market, and as a kind of principal thing, is likely to generate more user trust than when you prioritize based on market size, which I think has come up once or twice? Can I draw Demos or Omar out for an answer on those?
Yeah, for sure, Adam. So when it comes to the domain, right, if I can respond to this one, basically, it's very interesting. So .com is kind of powering the web, right? So I remember last time I was reading the statistics, it was more than 45% globally, right? All the websites are using .com, basically. So I would say it definitely increases trust, actually, rather than hampers it when it comes to the local domains, because it's powerful, it's trusted. They have seen multiple, let's say, websites around having the .com extension, so it kind of makes sense. Where I do think it plays importance is actually, I've seen it in, let's say, global companies, right? So things like when I was working, for example, in Adidas or in Sony, or, Amazon does this kind of strategy. When you want to go and expand into all the different local markets, right? And you want to maintain, let's say, 100 websites, then it actually makes sense, because there is things like shipping costs, you know, so you want to ensure that customers are locally, you know, and physically in the location. There is things like local considerations, like for example, if you're selling, you know, electrical devices, you need to keep in mind like voltage and so forth, or power outlets. There is things like shipping costs. So there is a lot of things at play, right? Why you would like to have a domain which is different from the .com, as well as when you're a global company, right? Anyways, you're going to purchase so many different, you know, domain names and even misspellings in order to ensure, you know, that you rank for SEO consistently. So I think there, yeah, for a global company, it makes sense. But for a local company, smaller company, if your name is up for grabs, just go with .com.
Fantastic. Well, it is 6 p.m. I want to be respectful of our viewers' time, so I think we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much to all of our panelists today. It's been an amazing alignment, and I look forward to the one next month. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and hopefully we'll see you again next time.
Thanks,
Bye.
Adam.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.